Hello, my name is Maria Isabel Andrade. I'm studying at University UNAV. It is the course Material Design for Face-to-Face Environment. And in this video, I'm going to talk about principles and procedures of material development for language learning. It's important to emphasize that teaching in general is a complex task in every way for their learning in a language, so you must teach people who communicate efficiently and effectively because communication is essential to achieve interpersonal relationships as well as being able to access all kinds of knowledge and produce new knowledge. Therefore, challenging to teach a mother tongue much greater is a challenge to teaching a foreign language. Many experience overly on their institution about what work and make frequent use of activity from their repertoire, which seem to fit with their objectives. Very few others are actually guided by learning principle of consideration of currents. Tollinson's position is that materials should not be random recreation from repertoire nor graphically honest of previously successful materials. Instead, they should be current and principal application of theories of language acquisition and development. Principally, our current knowledge of how the target language is actually used and the result of systematic observation and evaluation of materials in use. The learners are exposed to a rich, meaningful, and compressed input of language in use. They order to acquire the ability to use the language effectively. The learners need a lot of experience of the language being used in a variety of different ways for a variety of purposes. They need to be able to understand it and know of the input to gain positive access to it, and they need to be meaningful to them. They also need to experience particular language item and feature many times in meaningful and compressed input in order to eventually acquire them. Practice, practice, and practice. Use the word as often as possible and as many ways as possible. Say great and point to the words in an appropriate context. When an appropriate time comes up, not only should you repeat the word clearly, but have all the students repeat after you practice using the word in the correct context. Each classroom is different, so spend some time thinking of the important words you want your students to know. Sign their items they'll be encountering daily. Make sure they introduce directly or indirectly early on. Speaking and writing text, which provide extensive experience of language being used in order to achieve outcomes in a variety of text types in relation to topics, themes, events, localization. Make sure that the language the learners are exposed to is authentic in the sense that it represents who the language is typically used. If the language is inauthentic because it has been written or reduced the exemplify a particular language, the learners will not acquire the ability to use the language typically or effectively. Also, task-free activities help the learners. They involve things like lesson reading a poem or history or telling a joke or an anecdote. There are no questions or tasks after the listening. Also, task-free activities help the learners. They involve things like lesson reading a poem or history or telling a joke or an anecdote. There are no questions or tags after the listening. They need to be engaged both effectively and connectively. In the language experience of the learner, don't think and feel experience the language, they are unlikely to acquire any elements of it. If the learner don't feel any emotion which exposed to language in use, they are unlikely to acquire anything from their experience. Feel enjoyment, pleasure, and happiness, feeling empathy, being amused, being excited, being stimulated, are most likely to influence acquisition positively, but feeling anger, fears, position, and sadness is more useful than feeling nothing at all. The potential by, for example, basing in a text or talks like achieve effective and connective um, teaching points select from syllables. Also make use of activity which get the learners to think about they are reading or listening, also that they respond to it personality. Also make of activity which get learners to think a feel before, during, or after using the target language for communication. Language learners need to be positive about the target language, about their learning environment, about their teacher, about their fellow learners, about their learning material. They also need to achieve positive self-esteem and to feel that involved in the learning process and to respond by loudly, being angry, feeling sympathy, feeling happy, feeling sad. Positive emotions seem to be the most useful in relation to language acquisition, but it is much better to feel angry than feeling nothing at all. Make sure that the text and tags are interesting and relevant for a positive influence, stimulate emotive response through the use of music, song, art. So making use of controversial and provocative text through personalization and through inviting learners to articulate their feelings about a text before asking them to analyze it. Text on such provocative topics as drug abuse. The L1 students could be benefits use mental imaging. For example, think picture in their minds of emotional responses, thinking on their out life of prediction or personal interpretation. In learning L2, focus on linguistic decoding and decoding, multidimensional representation of language, and enrich the learning process from learning activities to realize to use. In L1, we use the inner voice, give our out voice that we hear and read to make plan, to make decision, to solve problems. Also, it's important the role of visual imaging, like imagine plays in L1 and in L2 visualize imagine to improve the learning, make activity which get learners to visualize and or use inner speech, make activity which help the learner to reflect on their mental activities. They need to understand how a particular language item is used. They are more likely to achieve readiness for acquisition. There is nothing when the learners write a text effectively and connectively and returns and investigates language use. Use activity when learners use the experience which engage them holistically and the learner focusing conscious attention. Use an experiential approach later and reflects on their experience and pay conscious learners. For example, use a oral language material in which the student experience a potentially engaging text, then discuss about the object and effectively in question. Learners need the opportunity to use language to try to achieve communicate purpose. Using language like hypothesis. If they are participating in interaction, they could clarify and elaborate knowledge, provide many opportunities for the learners, design outputs, activities that help the learners to develop their abilities to communicate fluently and appropriately. Developing classroom material consider the principle of language teaching. The teaching should meet the needs of the learners. Material need to be written in such a way that the teacher can make use of their research.